The Mojave in August does not forgive. By 9 in the morning, the asphalt on Route 127 had already turned soft at the edges, and the air above the flats shimmered in long, slow waves that made the horizon look like something drowning. There was no shade for 40 miles in any direction, only pale alkali earth, Joshua trees twisted into postures of permanent agony, and a sky so white with heat it had forgotten it was ever blue. Lena Carter had been in worse places. She reminded herself of that the way other people remind themselves to breathe. She was parked at the shoulder of the road beside a satellite relay truck, the kind of vehicle that looks completely forgettable because it is designed to white paneling, a logo for a company called Meridian Telecom that nobody has ever heard of, a small folding antenna mount on the roof bracket. She wore a tan work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, canvas trousers, boots with composite soles that left no useful print. Her hair was pulled back and covered with a mesh cap. Nothing about her said anything. That was the point. She was 34 years old. She was 5'7" and built the way a person gets built when they spend a decade learning that the body is not a source of comfort but a precision instrument. She had gray eyes that people consistently underestimated because they looked quiet. They were not quiet. They were always measuring. The relay station, 300 meters east of her position, had gone offline at 0600 hours. The reason was, officially, a blown junction relay due to heat stress on the capacitor housing. She had driven out from the substation in Barstow to assess it. That was her job now. Routine. Invisible. Hers. She had been living this life for 2 years. Before that, but she didn't go there anymore. Before was a country she had left with no forwarding address. She was eating an orange and reading the signal logs on her tablet when the first vehicle appeared. It came from the south on a dirt road that wasn't on any map she had, moving fast and trailing a rooster tail of caliche dust that rose 50 feet into the still air. Then a second vehicle behind it, then a third, all of them ex-military surplus, the kind of trucks that appear at auctions and disappear into gray markets, and reappear in places where oversight is thin. Lena did not reach for anything. She watched. The lead vehicle stopped 30 meters from her position. The second and third fanned out, bracketing the road. She counted the doors opening. 8 men. Possibly 9. She revised to 9 when a figure moved around the blind side of the rear truck. Weapons. 4 AKM variants, 2 with shortened stocks, 2 AR platforms, 1 man carrying what looked like a Mossberg. Not a military unit, not police. Posture was aggressive, but undisciplined. Too much space between them, no clear fields of fire. The body language of men who had been effective at intimidation and had stopped thinking beyond it. She set her orange peel carefully on the dashboard. The lead man was broad, with a shaved head and a beard that had gone ragged in the heat. He wore a plate carrier over a gray t-shirt and moved like someone who'd had some training enough to be dangerous, not enough to be controlled. He gestured at her with his rifle barrel, a lazy command. Out of the vehicle, hands visible. She complied without hurry. This was another thing the Marine Corps had taught her that could not be found in any manual. The profound tactical value of doing exactly what someone expects, at exactly the pace they expect it, until the moment arrives when you do neither. She stood beside the truck in the open sun. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight. She kept her hands at shoulder height and looked straight ahead, past the man with the shaved head, at nothing in particular. He studied her. She could feel it. Satellite technician, he said, reading the embroidery on her shirt with the particular tone of a man who finds something amusing. Long way out for a satellite tech. Relays down, she said. Flat. No effect. I go where the relay's down. He looked at the truck, then back at her. Something moved across his face, a calculation. Down the road to the north, she could hear what she'd been hearing for the last 2 minutes but had not yet acknowledged. More vehicles. And voices. The sounds of people being moved against their will. They had 7 other people when they brought everyone together in the shadow of a sandstone outcropping half a mile off the main road. A family, a man named Robert Halsey, his wife Christine, their teenage son who had broken down near the junction, a pair of geology students from Nevada, a woman in her 50s who identified herself only as a nurse, and a young man, maybe 22, who hadn't said a word since they'd been brought in and whose face had the particular gray stillness of someone in the early stages of shock. Lena cataloged them in the first 30 seconds, not cruelly, practically. She needed to know who would function, who would freeze, who was a liability she'd have to account for. Robert Halsey was going to be a problem. Not because he was dangerous, but because he was the kind of man who thought he was supposed to do something. He kept looking at the guards, then at his wife, and his jaw kept working. He was building toward a gesture that would get him hurt. The shaved man, the others called him Doyle, ran his operation with the specific efficiency of someone executing a plan that had been written by someone smarter than him. They set up 2 cameras on tripods. They arranged the hostages in a row. One of the men, a younger one with a sunburned neck and nervous hands, read from a phone screen demands, contact protocols, a routing address for the response. The production quality of their setup was too high for improvisation. This was a business. Lena stood at the left end of the line and breathed. She had done the calculations already 3 times, with slight variations to account for margin of error. Distance to the nearest cover, 11 meters. Current guard positions, 2 alert, 2 distracted, 1 dealing with a jammed camera mount, 4 more distributed around the perimeter. Wind, 6 to 8 miles per hour from the southwest, gusting occasionally. Ground, compacted sand over hardpan. Sound, carrying. Time, mid-morning, sun 3/4 east, which put it in the faces of the guards on the south side. She filed all of this. She did not act on any of it, not yet. Doyle walked down the row of hostages slowly, the way a man walks when he is performing for an audience he imagines is watching. When he reached Lena, he stopped. She looked at him without expression. "You," he said. "You're going to be our demonstration." He took her by the upper arm. She felt his grip, assessed it, and pulled her 2 steps forward, in front of the cameras. She went without resistance. He pressed the barrel of his pistol against her right temple. The metal was very hot from the sun. She felt it. She cataloged it. She kept her breathing at 12 cycles per minute, which was 3 cycles slower than resting and the product of years of training she had never fully managed to unlearn. Her heartbeat was a slow, steady percussion in her ears. Behind her, Christine Halsey made a sound that was almost a word. Robert Halsey's breathing was audible even from 3 meters away. The nervous young man with the sunburned neck pointed his camera at Lena's face and watched the screen. Doyle spoke to the camera in the voice of a man who had rehearsed this. He named amounts. He named deadlines. He named consequences. Lena looked directly into the lens. Not at Doyle, not at the guards. Into the lens. Her face was completely still. 14 seconds in, one of the men at the perimeter, a heavyset man with a sleeve tattoo, who hadn't said anything since the convoy stopped, began watching her instead of the camera feed. She noticed this in her peripheral vision without turning toward it. He was looking at her hands, then at her posture, then at a point just below her left ear. He had seen something. She filed that too. There is a particular quality of memory that the body holds separately from the mind. She had been 22 years old in the Helmand Valley when Staff Sergeant Patricia Owens had told her to take a breath, because breathing was the only thing between a good shot and a miss could cost everything. She had taken the breath. She had not missed. She had been 24 in Djibouti when her spotter, a Marine named Dennis Kowalski, who laughed at everything including the things that weren't funny, had whispered to her that she was the most frightening person he had ever been comfortable around, which he meant as the highest possible compliment and which she had taken that way. She had been 26 when they gave her the call sign, Desert Ghost. The name had come from an incident that was classified at a level she was not supposed to discuss and which, accordingly, she had never discussed with anyone. What she could say, what had filtered through the unit anyway, the way things do, was that she had spent 11 hours motionless in a position that should have been impossible to hold, in conditions that should have made concealment impossible. And that when it was over, the 3 people who needed to be alive were alive, and the 2 who needed to not be were not, and nobody on the opposing side had located her position before, during, or after. The training that preceded all of it had been the thing people outside the pipeline didn't understand. Because the popular idea of a sniper is a person with extraordinary eyesight and a steady hand, and while those things mattered, they were the least interesting part. The interesting part was what happened to a person's relationship with time. With waiting, most people, when placed in a hide and told to hold position, last 6 or 7 hours before the body begins to insist on its own priorities. The itch that cannot be scratched, the cramp that cannot be stretched, the fundamental human need to move that the nervous system enforces with increasing urgency. The training was designed to break that insistence, to teach the body that its preferences were negotiable. That time was not an enemy to be endured but a medium to be inhabited, like water. She had been better at this than almost anyone they had trained. Her instructors had been, by turns, impressed and unsettled by this quality in her. One of them, a retired Force Recon colonel named Briggs, who had the face of someone who had seen most things and been surprised by few of them, had told her once, at the end of a 42-hour exercise in which she had maintained a position through a rainstorm that turned the ground she was lying on into a slow-moving river, that she had the particular stillness of someone who had made a fundamental peace with her own existence. He meant it as a compliment. She was not entirely sure it was one. What she knew, lying in the mud while rain moved around her and through her, was that the stillness wasn't peace. It was precision. The stillness was the result of directing everything outward, every sense, every thread of attention to the environment, and leaving nothing inside to create movement. You became an instrument. The instrument was still because instruments are still. Hammers do not fidget. The valley had broken something in that, not the stillness, which remained, but the uncomplicated relationship she'd had with what the stillness was for. After the valley, she knew that the precision she'd been trained to apply could be applied by anyone with the authority, at any target, for any reason, regardless of whether the reason was the one she'd been told. The instrument was still, but the person holding the instrument was not always trustworthy. That understanding had taken 14 months to fully arrive, by which time she'd already begun the paperwork. She had left the Marines at 29. The reason was also something she didn't talk about, a mission in a place that she mentally designated only as the Valley, and a decision made by someone above her pay grade that had turned a successful extraction into something else. She had filed the report. The report had been received. Nothing had changed because of it. 18 months later, she had submitted her separation paperwork, packed a single duffel bag, and driven west until the desert felt familiar enough to be safe. 2 years of satellite relays and heat and silence. She had been good at silence her entire life. The desert was the first place that seemed to understand it. Back in the present, the man with the sleeve tattoo had moved 2 steps closer. His name, she would later learn, was Travis Colton. He had done 3 tours with the Army, 2 in Iraq, 1 as an advisor. He was the only person in this entire operation who had the experience to look at a woman standing calmly with a gun to her head and understand that he was not looking at a victim. He was looking at a problem. He caught Doyle's eye and jerked his chin toward Lena. Doyle waved him off without looking away from the camera. Colton's jaw tightened. He stepped closer again. Doyle. Shut up, Travis. Doyle. His voice was different this time. Lower. Not louder, lower. The voice of a man who has learned that the most dangerous communications happen quietly. Look at her wrists. The tattoo was small enough that most people looked past it. It sat on the inside of her left forearm, 2 inches below the wrist. A minimalist design, simple in the way that significant things often are, a stylized crosshair superimposed over the Marine Corps globe and anchor, the kind of mark that specific units used as informal identifiers, and that someone with the right background would read immediately. Colton read it. He had met 4 Marine snipers in his career. He had worked alongside 2 of them. He understood, with a specificity that only comes from proximity to genuine expertise, that what he was looking at was not a personality type, but a skill set, the product of a selection process that washed out 93% of candidates, followed by a training pipeline that was, in his considered estimation, among the most demanding things a human body could be subjected to on this continent. She's a Marine sniper, he said. He wasn't raising his voice. He was being very precise. Doyle looked at him for a long moment, then looked at Lena, then back at Colton. She's a satellite tech, Doyle said. She's wearing satellite tech clothes. She has a Marine sniper tattoo and she's been standing with a gun at her head for 4 minutes with a resting heart rate. I can see her pulse in her throat. 12, 14 beats a minute. That's not adrenaline suppression. That's training. Doyle's expression moved through several rooms quickly. Skepticism, irritation, the first faint draft of something else. You're telling me I'm telling you I don't know what she's doing out here or why she hasn't done anything yet. And both of those things concern me significantly more than what she is. He looked at Lena steadily. Walk away from her. Leave her in the line. Don't give her a reason. For a moment, it hung there. Doyle was not stupid. He was operating from a framework that had worked repeatedly, which is a specific kind of dangerous, a man who has confused a limited sample size with a universal law. His model of hostage operations did not have room for a category like Lena Carter. He had never needed such a category before. She's one woman, he said finally. There are 9 of us. Colton's eyes stayed on Lena. She was watching something in the middle distance, or appearing to, he knew, with the gut certainty of a soldier who has spent years reading threat indicators, that she was watching everything at once and that the apparent vacancy of her gaze was the most dangerous thing about her. There were 11 of us, he said quietly, until about 3 minutes ago. Doyle turned. The 2 guards who had been stationed at the far perimeter, Garrett and a man called Pitch who'd joined the crew 6 weeks ago, were no longer at their positions. Nobody had heard anything. The wind moved through the scrub. Doyle's face changed completely. When? I don't know, Colton said. And then, very evenly, that's the problem. Lena had not moved. She was still standing where Doyle had left her, 3 feet in front of the line of hostages, hands loosely at her sides. The cameras were still rolling. Nobody had thought to stop them. Inside, something had shifted. It happened at the moment the young man in the line, the one in shock, was struck across the shoulder by one of the remaining guards who wanted him to sit down faster than he was capable of sitting. The blow wasn't hard enough to be serious injury, but it was the particular blow of a man who has confused compliance with control, who has started to understand that things are going wrong, and is expressing that understanding as violence toward the most available target. The young man folded at the knees and caught himself with his palms in the dirt. Lena's hands closed. It was a very small movement. Her fingers curled once and then released. And that was all but the part of her brain that had been observing the environment with the detached curiosity of a geologist cataloging strata became something else. Not yet action. Not yet decision. But the chamber was loaded. She had been mapping the position of every weapon in the camp since the first vehicle stopped. Doyle's sidearm, holstered left hip, civilian retention holster, slow draw. The man who'd hit the student, AKM variant, carrying it high and tight, which meant his dominant hand was always near the receiver, quick but fatiguing, and he'd been carrying it that way for 2 hours. 2 of the remaining men, rifles slung, which was the most dangerous configuration because it required the fewest additional steps to bring to bear. 4 guards currently visible. Colton was the variable. She thought about Colton. He was good. He might be very good. He was also the only person in this camp who understood what she was. The tactical problem with Colton was that he was not behaving like the others, not with bravado or carelessness, but with the measured awareness of a man who knows he is in proximity to something he cannot fully model. He was standing at a diagonal that kept her in his sightline without appearing to focus on her. He had not moved to threaten her because threatening her would give her information about his response time and position. He was waiting. She respected this. It made him more dangerous. She continued to wait. The sun moved a degree in the sky. The wind picked up. At the western horizon, beyond the flat expanse of alkali flats, a wall of brown was rising against the pale sky wide and low, and moving at the particular velocity that anyone who'd spent time in the desert would recognize immediately. A haboob, a wall of suspended particulate driven ahead of a dry thunderstorm front. Still 40 minutes away. But the leading gust would arrive much sooner, and when it did, the ambient light would drop and the air would fill with particles that turned visibility to almost nothing in seconds. Lena had noticed it 12 minutes ago. She had been waiting for it. She took 4 slow breaths, each one slightly deeper than the last, the way a diver prepares to go under. And then Robert Halsey, who had been building toward a gesture since the moment they were taken, finally made it. He stood up. He said something. She didn't catch the words because she was already moving. The first gust from the haboob arrived as a change in pressure rather than a rush of wind, a sudden drop in the quality of the air, the light going amber, then the sound, a dry roar like paper being torn on a cosmic scale. Then the wall hit and everything disappeared. Lena was not there when it did. She had moved on the first gust, using the 2 seconds of obscured sightlines as Robert Halsey's gesture pulled 3 of the guards' attention. The ground was compacted hardpan beneath a half-inch of surface sand. She'd known this from the way sound had traveled all morning. She moved low and fast and her boots made almost no sound. What happened in the next 4 minutes will not be described in the sequence of its violence, because that is not how Lena experienced it. She experienced it as a series of geometric problems, position, angle, timing, the use of mass and leverage rather than strength, the removal of variables from the equation. She had trained to do in darkness what most people couldn't do in daylight. She had trained to do in a sandstorm what most people couldn't do standing still. Each problem was solved once. Correctly, she did not have to solve any of them twice. The wind carried sound away from the camp in every direction. The haboob turned the world brown and opaque. Christine Halsey had her arm around the geology students and was keeping them low and still in the lee of the outcropping. Robert Halsey was on the ground. He'd been shoved down by one of the guards in the first confused moments of the storm. The nurse had found the young man in shock and was holding his head down with both hands, keeping him from rising and becoming a silhouette. When the visibility dropped to less than 3 meters, Lena's advantages became almost absolute. She had been operating in low visibility environments since she was 22 years old. She navigated by sound, by the spatial memory she had built in the 45 minutes since arrival, by the physics of the terrain she had cataloged before any of this started. The guards were operating on panic and instinct. Panic and instinct in a sandstorm, in the open, against a target who knows exactly where you are and exactly where you will be if you continue doing what panic tells you to do, is not a strategy. It is an ending. The wind was the only sound. Colton ran through the storm with his hand over his face and his mind working. He'd moved the moment it hit not toward the hostages, not toward Doyle, but to a position of cover from which he could observe the most likely escape vectors. He was good at this. He had done it before in places where the atmosphere was also trying to kill him, but he was running the numbers and the numbers were not good. Garrett and Petch had been gone before the storm. 2 more had gone down in the first minutes. He'd caught the sounds even through the wind, sounds he recognized from his professional background as the specific noise of controlled force applied with precision, not shots fired, not shouting, just the brief, contained violence of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. That left Doyle, himself, and 3 others. He stopped moving and put his back against the sandstone and slowed his breathing and listened. The storm howled. He heard something he wasn't sure what. Movement to his left, maybe 8 meters, maybe 10. He shifted his position without stepping away from the rock. 2 feet to the right. He'd been in enough close-quarters situations to know that the moment you commit to a direction is often the moment someone who's been watching you makes their choice. Nothing moved. He waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The wind dropped slightly, just a breath, the storm pausing the way storms do, and in that relative quiet he heard footsteps. Not from the left, from directly above. He looked up. The outcropping behind him was 12 feet high at its peak, with a natural ledge at about 8 feet. He hadn't thought to account for it because climbing it in the current conditions seemed... He moved, not fast enough. She dropped from the ledge and took him down with a controlled fall that used his own weight and a precise application of pressure to a joint she had identified in the first half second. He was on his stomach with his face in the sand and his weapon out of reach before he completed the thought that had started with 8 feet. Nobody can. He didn't struggle. He was too good to waste energy on a struggle he could assess was over. She had his arm locked. Her knee was in a position that told him, with the biomechanical clarity of someone who had studied this from the other side, that she could end the conversation permanently if she chose to. She chose not to. "Colton," she said. Her voice was even. "You have a decision to make." He was breathing hard. The sand was in his mouth. He turned his head to the side and spat. "Yeah," he said. "I figured. Tell me where Doyle is." A long pause. She let him have it. "He's in the truck," Colton said finally. "The lead vehicle. He'll have locked it from the inside. Plate carrier and the doors reinforced. It's the vehicle he modified specifically for. Tell me something I haven't already figured out. Another pause. She felt him make the calculation she'd been waiting for him to make. There's a sat phone in his vest, Colton said. Encrypted. He's got 3 contacts who can mobilize within 40 minutes. He'll have called them the moment the storm hit. Has he? I don't know. Yes, you do. The pause was shorter this time. Probably. Yeah. She released his arm but kept her knee in place. Get up slowly. Hands where I can see them. He did. In the amber half-light of the storm, he looked at her for a long moment. His face was sand-scored and his eyes were evaluating her with the same quality of attention she had identified in him from the beginning. She let him look. She was doing the same thing. Up close, she could read the full geography of his career in his face, not the specifics, but the general shape of it, the scar along his left jawline from something edged, the way his eyes moved in small controlled increments rather than the wide sweeping glances of someone whose environment has always been basically safe, the hands, which were large and capable and which, even in the awkward position of compliance, were not trembling. He had been in bad situations before and had come out of them by thinking clearly. She could see the thinking happening now. You had me from the ledge, he said. Not a question. Processing. I had you from the rock, she said. The ledge was just where I waited for you to commit to the wrong direction. His jaw moved slightly. He was recalibrating, running the replay, finding the moment she had redirected him without his awareness. She could tell from his expression when he found it a fractional narrowing around the eyes, the expression of a professional acknowledging that another professional has done something technically impressive in a way that has no larger consolation. How long were you up there? He asked. Long enough. Desert Ghost, he said. I heard that name, once. Helmand. Maybe 2018. She didn't confirm or deny. You weren't a myth, he said. No, she said. I wasn't. She gestured with 2 fingers. He moved ahead of her through the storm. The truck was exactly where she'd expected it to be. Doyle had backed it against the largest section of outcropping available, which covered his rear and gave him sightlines on the 2 most obvious approach vectors. He had thought about this. She gave him credit for that. He had also, she noted, left a blind spot of approximately 40 degrees on his left flank by choosing aesthetics backing against the most imposing section of rock over tactics. A smaller section, 30 meters to the north, would have given him a full 360 of clear sightlines, but it didn't look as secure. She stood 60 meters out and waited for the wind to drop enough that her voice would carry. When it did, she spoke at a volume calibrated precisely for the distance, not shouting. Just enough. Marcus Doyle. A long silence. Your reinforcements won't get here in time, she said. I've been listening to your radio traffic since you set up the cameras. The encrypted channel your sat phone is using runs through the Meridian Telecom relay on Route 127. The relay that's been offline since 6 this morning. A pause. I know. I'm the one who took it offline. The window of the truck didn't move. She hadn't expected it to. She was not talking to him because she expected a response. She was talking to him because in her experience, silence from a capable position is more destabilizing than any threat she could articulate. She was letting him sit in what he now understood, which was that he was inside a plan someone else had made. That the landscape he thought he'd chosen had been chosen for him. Behind her, with his hands zip-tied at the small of his back and his weapon secured, Colton sat on the ground and watched with the expression of a man watching a chess match in a language he almost speaks. She took 3 steps closer to the truck. I have your operation recorded, she said. Video and audio, uploaded to a server location you can't access and won't be able to find. The moment I walk away from this clearing, it goes to 3 separate agencies. The people who hired you are already looking for a way to distance themselves from what you've done today. You're the part that can be cut off. The truck door opened. Doyle stepped out with his hands visible and his weapon holstered. He had made a calculation. She could see it in the set of his face, the particular flatness of a man who has decided to renegotiate rather than escalate. He was good at reading situations. He'd built a career on it. He looked at her across the distance. Who are you? He said. She said nothing. He looked at Colton on the ground. Colton shook his head slightly. Doyle's jaw moved once. He had the face of a man who has just understood that the territory does not match the map he was given. That somewhere between Barstow and this outcropping, the universe had handed him a file that was labeled one thing and contained something entirely else. What do you want? He said. I want to know who hired you, she said. She had a recording device. It was small, smaller than anything he might have searched for if he'd searched her, which he hadn't, because she'd been carrying it in a location that required a level of methodical inspection that hostile actors in operational conditions almost never perform. The device had been transmitting since she first stepped out of the truck on the highway shoulder. It had captured everything. What Doyle told her, standing in the gritty amber light at the tail end of a dying storm, was not new information entirely. She had known the shape of it, the way you know the shape of something under a cloth, without seeing the specific contours. But she needed it in his voice, with his level of specific detail, because agencies that might find a satellite technician's report unpersuasive would find the operational commander's own confession considerably more useful. He was not a dramatic man about it. When he understood the geometry that his contractors were burned, his reinforcements unreachable, the hostages unharmed and already witnesses, and that the woman standing in front of him was not operating alone, he gave her what she asked for with the flat efficiency of a professional acknowledging that a job has gone wrong. There was a particular quality to this kind of confession that she had observed before and recognized immediately: the absence of shame. Doyle was not confessing because he was sorry. He was confessing because he was calculating. And the calculation had produced a result that favored disclosure. He spoke the way a man speaks when he's already thinking 3 moves ahead and has determined that the current position is not one he can defend. His voice was level, his details were precise. He did not attempt to frame himself sympathetically or ask for anything. He was simply